Yeah. Sanbonan. Molweni. Dumelang. Abshin. Dimasiari. Goeiemiddag. Good afternoon. Former President Kgalema Motlanthe, Mama Graça Machel, and the entire Mandela family, the Mayor of the City of Cape Town, Your Worship Dan Plato, Minister Nathi Mthethwa, the Minister of Arts and Culture and Sports, Isithwalandwe, Dennis Goldberg, members of the Mandela Reception Committee who are here, distinguished peace activists and Nobel Peace Laureate Ms. Leima Gobe, ambassadors and members of the diplomatic corps, and my sister Judy, who is the head of the Mandela Rhodes Foundation, Chief Executive of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, Ndate Sello Hatang, and all other trustees and ministers and MECs and distinguished guests, but most importantly, greetings to all of you young people who are here. I say hello to all of you, hello. 30 years ago, we stood here with this very man who is standing next to me. He stood here to speak, and I held a microphone as he spoke for the very first time. It was here when we received Nelson Mandela and celebrated his release from prison. The 11th of February will forever be remembered as one of those most memorable days in the history of the world, not only in the history of South Africa. Everyone who was aware of what was happening in South Africa tries to remember where they were and what they were doing at the moment when Nelson Mandela was released from prison. Some were young, but today they too try to remember what it felt like at the time, like one Tsepo Makubela, who now works for government. He wrote to me this morning and said, "Good morning, Mr. President. Today marks the 30th anniversary since the release of Madiba, and I remember seeing you at the forefront of Victor Verster prison, leading the way as Mandela took his first steps from freedom. I remember the day," he says, "like it was yesterday. I was a young boy in Soweto, elated knowing that Madiba's freedom meant freedom for all South Africans," close quotes. It was the day that dramatically changed the course of the history of our country. I cannot think of a single day in the history of our country when an event positively changed the course of the country like the release of Nelson Mandela from prison. It was an emotional moment when Utatu Madiba worked out of Victor Verster prison as a free man after 27 lonely and painful years of imprisonment. He walked out of prison a free man into the hearts and the warm arms of the people of South Africa and was happily received here at this very space where we are at the Marine Parade by the masses of our people here in Cape Town. It was you, the people of the Western Cape and Cape Town, who came out in your thousands as you lined up along the road from Fixter to Cape Town to catch a glimpse of this great legendary man who had been hidden in the dungeons of apartheid cells for almost 3 decades. You swirled the streets in front of the City Hall, waving ANC flags, singing and crying with joy, and you were chanting, "The ANC lives, the ANC leads." It was indeed an exhilarating moment. It was a moment when the world literally stood still. People all over the world, they stood still to watch their television screens, and CNN at that time had just really gotten off broadcasting real-time news. They watched as Nelson Mandela with Mama Winnie Mandela walk out of prison, and people all over the world were filled with tears, and it was tears of joy. A day when the whole world focused their eyes on us and our country. There was simply magic in the air. That was the day when we touched the future with our hearts and our hopes. It was a day when we had been yearning for, even as we did not know what the future looked like. All that mattered for all of us was that our freedom had finally arrived. The day Madiba was released was the day we all knew that apartheid was dead and it was finished and clear. The apartheid genie had definitely gone out of the bottle and could not be put back again. And it was you who came from far and wide, men and women, black and white, fathers carrying their children on their shoulders, who were all over here. It was you who gave the most historic welcome to our hero. But it was you, the people of our country, who had ensured that Nelson Mandela was freed from prison. It was through your struggles in the underground. It was through your struggles, through mass mobilization, in your various organizations, your unions, your churches, your sporting bodies, your civic bodies, and many others. It was, yes, through the armed struggle. It was also, yes, through international solidarity, the 4 pillars that Minister Mthethwa spoke about. It was the people of this country who had finally achieved their victory to make sure that indeed Nelson Mandela was released. It was not out of the kindness of F.W. de Klerk's heart. It was not because he felt sorry for Nelson Mandela. It was not because he was a kind-hearted man. It was because of the pressure and the struggles that the people of our country waged to enable Nelson Mandela to be released. It was your victory. It was, yes, on this day, the day when all the people of our country rejoiced and held a massive party. Ons het lekker gepartij hier Hier by hierdie plek. Daar was net baie mense hier. Hulle het lekker gedans, hulle het lekker gesing, hulle het lekker geluister as Nelson Mandela addressed us. I'm pleased to see so many young people in this crowd today. And I want to applaud the Nelson Mandela Foundation for having arranged that so many young people should be here. You are the generation born from democracy. You will have grown up with the story of Utata Madiba, learned about him in school, and even seen him on television. Some of you may even have been lucky enough to have met him. I will tell you that on that day 30 years ago, these steps were also full of young South Africans like you. They were all over here, standing together, shoulder to shoulder with Walter Sisulu, Utata Madiba. They wanted to see where their country was going to be taken to. But unlike you, the young people in the crowd had never ever seen Madiba's face, nor heard his voice. He had been jailed before they were even born, and all they knew of him was his name, whispered by their parents. Throughout those 27 years, when he was a prisoner of a heartless regime, it was the mothers and the fathers of this country who kept his name and memory alive. Mama Winnie Mandela kept Nelson Mandela's name alive every day. She and many others kept the fires of resistance burning in the breasts of the people of this country. We recall the mothers and fathers of Khayelitsha, of Manenberg, of Gugulethu, Bonteheuwel, and in so many other towns and villages who ensured that the name Nelson Mandela was never forgotten. You are the people who hid his messages and writings and those of the banned African National Congress in your homes and shared them with others to keep his memory alive. You wore T-shirts with messages printed like "Free Nelson Mandela," risking arrest. You told your children about him and that he was fighting so that one day we could all be free. At a time when the mere mention of his name was enough to get you arrested, you never let up the cry that had been resounding around the world to free Nelson Mandela. You, the people of this great city, kept your promise to him that you would bring him home, and you did bring Nelson Mandela home. And his first place of arrival was here in Cape Town. So thank you, Cape Town, for warmly welcoming Nelson Mandela. So we pay tribute to you as Cape Townians. Above all, we thank you. It is indeed difficult to describe, having been witness to the event, the day the gates of Victor Verster prison swung open and President Mandela walked free. I was pleased to hear that a number of members who were part of the reception process went to Victor Verster prison, and a number of them are here. Trevor Manuel, Vali Musa, Bulelani Nguka, Jay Naidu, and a number of others. They are here and they can tell their own stories of how that day unfolded, and how, as we brought Nelson Mandela from Victor Verster, when we had said to the apartheid regime, now that you have released him into the hands of our people. We don't want any of your police or army near him, because we feared that they could harm him when he was amongst our people. So we said, and so we drove him from Victor Verster coming up here into Cape Town. And along the way, the convoy was so long and so complicated was the traffic that along the way we lost Nelson Mandela's car. We did not know where his car was for a few hours. I was with Vali Musa, Trevor Manuel, and we panicked and thought that the people of our country will never forgive us for having lost Nelson Mandela. But he emerged, and we were really pleased. So this was a moment that brings a lot of words into one's mind: exhilaration, excitement, anticipation, fear, relief, joy. Perhaps all of these were rolled into one. But nothing could describe that brief second when the microphone crackled right here where I am standing, when it crackled to life and a hush came over the crowd, because that was the moment when everyone was waiting to hear Nelson Mandela's very first words. And when he uttered the famous words, "I stand before you, not as a prophet, but as a humble servant of you, the people," everybody just applauded and got excited, because many people were hearing his voice for the first time. 30 years since that day, we will forever remember those first words of this great man, this great symbol of resistance and of the inhumanity of the apartheid regime. This icon who in every sense is a legend. He had endured the unimaginable 27 years of incarceration, torn away from his family and his community, and shut away from the outside world and taken away from his organization. First on a forsaken island in the middle of the sea, and then behind the high walls of a prison compound. He had been taken to prison in chains while still a young man in his prime, and was now returning as a 72-year-old man whose health had been ravaged by the harshness of prison life. Given all he had gone through, it would have been understandable if he used his first speech right here at this point where I'm standing, as a free man, standing on these steps to denounce his captors, to gloat and to call for revenge. If anyone had the right to do so, it was Nelson Mandela. But he stood here and paid tribute to the people of South Africa, to the international community that had campaigned for his release, to the leaders of the liberation movement, in particular the African National Congress and fallen comrades. He repeated demands for the release of political prisoners, for the lifting of the state of emergency, and for the immediate end to violence so that negotiations could commence. He called on white compatriots to be part of shaping a new South Africa, saying uniting the people of the country was the foremost priority. President Nelson Mandela's words that day set the tone for a country that was in the throes of upheaval and uncertainty. It was a combination of strength and modesty. It was firm, but it was also reassuring. His words were delivered with the gravity and humility of a man whose life forever stands as a testimony to the victory of reconciliation over retribution, of the olive branch over the gun, and of coexistence over conflict. He spoke of many things, but above all of them he said, the need to unite the people of South Africa is as important a task now as it has always been. In saying these words, he laid the cornerstone of what would become the edifice of a non-racial, united, and democratic South Africa, the central key objective of his organization, the African National Congress. These words were as true today as they were back then. They were words that brought hope to the downtrodden and the dispossessed. They brought courage to the despondent and even the cynical. They brought comfort to millions of our white compatriots who feared that this man, that this racist government had so demonized and maligned, would declare that they should be driven into the sea. It is easy for those with the benefit of hindsight to decry the choices and the decisions made by the founding fathers and mothers of this country during these turbulent times. And it is easy for those who decry what Madiba did to sit back and be critical of the leadership that he provided as he sought to mesh us into a nation. The winds of change were sweeping across the land. The African National Congress and other liberation movements had been unbanned, and their leadership were making their way home from exile. The government was bankrupt, and the economy was in free fall, rendering the state the liberation movement stood to inherit hollow and weakened. The right wing were mobilizing and marshalling their forces of intolerance to railroad the negotiation process. Many of the doomsday prophets said it would be impossible under these conditions to bring South Africa back from the brink. And yet, coming together as a nation, we did, under the leadership of Nelson Mandela, who had vision and foresight, who had the strength of the organization that he led. There is one singular reality of which we should never ever lose sight. It is that historic speech made by Madiba on these steps 30 years ago played a pivotal role in determining the future trajectory of this country. The speech right here, preceded by the walk out of Victor Verster, that was televised around the world, will forever adorn the chronicles of South Africa's liberation history. Following Madiba's release, negotiations that the ANC and Madiba had long called for got underway. These negotiations would culminate in our historic democratic elections, where Nelson Mandela became the first president of a new South Africa. That was the moment when we had a real president in this country. That was the moment when we felt we had our own president at last. Nearly everyone who set eyes on Madiba for the first time knew immediately that they were looking and seeing a president. He looked like a president. He spoke like a president. He walked like a president. Those who also saw him eating say that they could see that he was eating like a president. Even those who saw him asleep at times, they said he slept like a president. And some would even say he dreamt like a president. At last, South Africa had its own president in none other than Nelson Mandela. Now, with the greatest statesman and icon of resistance, Nelson Mandela affirming his commitment to reconciliation, to dialogue, to negotiation, to putting differences aside in pursuit of the greater good, it would indeed have been impossible for those of far lesser stature to resort to warmongering or to even talk of revenge. There are many lessons we can draw from the life of our nation's founding father. They will have been expounded upon earlier today to all of you young people in the dialogue that the Nelson Mandela Foundation organized. But the most enduring legacy President Mandela bequeathed this generation is the understanding that to achieve a bigger goal, sacrifices and compromises are necessary, be they personal or professional, and that the greater good must at all times triumph over self-interest and self-preservation. On that historic day 30 years ago, Utatu Nelson Mandela spoke of the struggle having reached a decisive moment. Uye wathi Utatu Madiba, wathi kudala silindile, kudala silindele le nkululeko, siyayifuna ngoku, asisafuni ukulinda nosuku olunye. Today now we are indeed at a decisive moment as well as a nation. We know that our country is facing many challenges. We too can no longer wait. The state of the economy, the high levels of unemployment, the social ills wreaking havoc in our communities, the shameful killing of women and girls, the stench of corruption and abuse of public funds have led to a trust deficit with our citizens. And this threatens to reverse our democratic gains. In 2 days from now, I will be delivering the State of the Nation address in Parliament to report back to the people of South Africa on what we have done and what we have not succeeded in doing over the past year. We will also talk frankly about how we should chart a new course for the year ahead. We can be proud of our achievements in entrenching the democracy that Nelson Mandela led us so ably to install. But yet, there is much we can be less proud of. Millions of our people continue to live in poverty. Millions of our people, especially young people, are unemployed. The divide between the haves and the have-nots continues to widen. We must intensify our efforts to make good on the promise made by Madiba and his generation of leaders to bring a better life to our people, especially young people who have come out in their numbers today and who, despite our many challenges, see this country as a place of promise and opportunity. Madiba advocated the empowerment of young people and the empowerment of women in all respects. Their role in decision-making, not only in his party, the ANC, but in government, in society, and in business. Far away in Johannesburg, the flame of democracy burns outside the doors of the Constitutional Court. It was first lit on the 10th of December 2011 by President Mandela to mark the signing of the Constitution. It is a testament to our democracy and our Constitution. It was you, President Motlanthe, who said at the time, "This light symbolizes our inner strength. Let us pass it to future generations." To the youth of South Africa, I say to you today, it is in your honor that the eternal flame of democracy burns at Constitution Hill. It is you and the generations yet to come that we will do everything we can to live up to the example that was set by men and women like President Mandela, who put their countrymen and women before self. Let us, as the custodians of the memory of Madiba, continue to ensure that his name evokes unity of purpose, rejuvenates new patriotism amongst us. Let us be forever mindful that we are not a mere collection of communities that happen to share common space, but a nation that is guided by a vision. Let us all commit to creating an environment that fosters the unity of the people of South Africa. Let us contribute our skills, our knowledge, our expertise to improve the living condition of our people and dispense with the mentality that it is better to be at home, unemployed, than to go out there and try to be of service in our communities. Let us also promote a culture of learning, of teaching and service, and be more involved in the process of getting educated, but also getting our children educated as parents and not leave it only to our teachers. Let's strengthen our schooling and healthcare service and cease with the senseless and criminal act of vandalizing hospitals, clinics, schools, trains, in some misguided form of service delivery protest. Let us build clean and safe communities and protect the rights of women and children, and not think gender-based violence is somebody else's problem. Let us work together to root out crime and corruption in both the public and private sectors and strengthen the rule of law in our country. Let us not solicit or pay bribes or engage in corrupt acts as citizens and report criminality when we see it. Let us develop new industries to generate employment opportunities and not as business sit on our capital and fail to invest it back into the community. Let's restore credibility to our democratic state institutions and support them so that the public sees them as defenders and protectors of our constitutional order. And let us ensure that land reform process becomes a reality in our country and that the land is returned to the rightful owners of the land of South Africa. If we truly work together, we can grow South Africa and make it a better place. Let us, in Tata Madiba's words, seize this moment of such great symbolism to set our sights firmly on the path of renewing and healing this great nation, so that, in Tata Madiba's words, the process towards democracy is rapid and interrupted. And I say, as we remember Madiba on this day, 30 years after his release, let us all, each one of us, try to live in his image. Let us try to ensure that the vision that he had is fulfilled as all of us as South Africans work together to achieve the South Africa that we all want. A South Africa that is democratic, non-racial, non-sexist, and prosperous, so that the prosperity can be shared amongst all of us as set out in the Freedom Charter. Let us celebrate today as we remember this man who's standing next to me and thank him for all the work that he did to bring us where we are. Thank you, Ngiyabulel.
I think we can do better than that. Can we give the President a huge round of applause? I think you